Hi, welcome back to WePC. Today we're going to be showing you how to fit an AIO. We're going to be using the pretty new Corsair iCUE h150i Capellix. This came out a few months ago, has been quite difficult to get a hold of, so we only got a hold of our first few, I think a week ago now. As well as this, we're going to be using the also new Corsair 5000D. This also comes with the iCUE Commander Core, which is Corsair's kind of all-in-one system to allow you to connect all of the fans that you have throughout the case, as well as obviously all your AIO stuff, so you can then connect it to Corsair's iCUE on your computer. Okay, so first off, we're going to open the box. This is actually the first time I'm opening this box and the first time I've used the Capellix, as mentioned earlier. I had it for like a week, but just not had time to actually fit any of them yet, so I can't imagine it's much different to the Corsair h150 Pro XT or even the old h115s, but we'll see. Okay, so straight out of the bag you get obviously TR4, which is obviously for Threadripper, AMD Threadripper, AM4, which is obviously for just normal AMD, Intel bracket, which is obviously for Intel. This is one of the new things about the Capellix, which is basically customizable pump plates. Pump RGB plates. I don't really know what that's actually called. What this means is basically you can change this one for the other one. I think it's a black one and this white one, and I guess it just shows slightly different RGB through the pump itself. I think the most important thing for me about this is the fact that obviously I assume you'll be able to turn it, because sometimes you have a slightly different AIO placement and you want it all to look nice. As well as that, you get a little Allen key, which not had before. I assume that's probably something to do with the pump. As mentioned, the three fans, just checking. Yep, so it's typical Corsair. You have your PWM and you have your RGB wires. And then last but not least is the pump and radiator itself, which is obviously here. And oh, finally, of course, the Commander Core, iCUE Commander Core, and obviously some wires that you'll connect to the PSU at some point and to your motherboard, which is a USB and a SATA. Can't do much without, come on, screws. So we got our screws. First, before we get started with installing the AIO, we need to prepare the case. So we're just going to move this to one side and take the side panel off this case. So as mentioned, this is one of the new Corsair 5000 series cases. We've done an unboxing of both this one and the 5000X, so check them out on our channel. We'll also probably be doing a build with them soon at some point. Right, okay, so we need to also take the top off because we're going to be installing this at the top. With this case, it's just a simple click. Really easy case to work with. I have to admit Corsair's improvements in their cases recently has been really, really good. Probably worth noting at this point, when you're going to install your AIO, there is various different places you can install it. Personally, I either install it on the front to pull air in or on the top to push air out. And also in terms of where you want push and pull, generally speaking, if not in all cases, the back is an exhaust, so if you do put a fan on the back, then it exhausts air out, hot air out. The same for the top. The top will exhaust air out, hot air out. The front will pull air in, and then if you do have the option, on some cases, the bottom will also pull air in, and then sometimes you have side panels with fans in. It really depends on a case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, you've got the front, the top, and the back. So the back and the top, exhaust, front, pull. Because we're using the 5000X, this already comes with three Corsair RGB fans at the front, which are, again, are pulling air in. So we're going to leave them there on this build. What we're going to do is instead put the AIO on the top here, which will exhaust air out. So as the air rises, and obviously the fresh air, the clean air comes in, and the hot air rises, this will help basically extract the air, and the radiator being at the top, and whilst the fans are pushing the air through, will help to cool down the AIO itself. So yeah, okay, so first off, what I typically start with, and to be honest, there's a few ways you can do this. You've got a few different stages to put in an AIO into a PC build. One stage is obviously actually the CPU part, so fitting it to the CPU and the motherboard itself. That's kind of like one stage. The other stage obviously is adding the fans to the actual radiator itself. Typically I do this first. And then the last stage, or one of the last stages, is obviously actually screwing the radiator into place on the actual PC. Then you've obviously got the actual cable management and all of that stuff, but we'll go into that later. Right, yeah, so we're going to get started by putting the fans on the radiator. When you're going to basically when you've decided where your fans are going, where the AIO is going and stuff, one thing you probably want to take into account, which many times I've just forgot and then had to unscrew and screw back in, is how it's going to be placed and where the cables are going to go. Because what you don't want really is it to be like this and then these cables to be at the front here showing. You want the cables to be tucked around the back. So you basically want it, so if we're putting this like this, then we want the fans with the cables at the back, so then we can put them through the grommets at the top and then hide them on the back side panel of the case, rather than like this, and then obviously you go to fit it and you realise your cable's all messy at the front. Obviously ruins the aesthetics, and you'll probably just have to unscrew the fans and then replace the fans, reposition the fans. So just, yeah. When you're screwing it in, one thing I'd note is this has happened once before on the NZXT fans, on the NZXT AIO that I have, the Kraken X73 or what it's called. Don't screw them too tight, you really don't need to. But another thing is, I mean, the Corsair ones are always pretty durable, but the NZXT ones that I had, I screwed it in a little bit too tight probably, and it snapped the bracket. So yeah, don't think you have to screw it in like crazy tight, you really don't. Another thing is always do diagonals. It's just easier, better. Boom, see, done. There we go. Yeah, so now the fans are in. Next stage is to really go back to the CPU motherboard, probably just check the manual and figure out which bracket you need. They are all labelled, but still it's just worth just checking the manual. In our instance, we're using a X570 GB Aorus Pro or Master, one of those, and the Ryzen 5800X CPU. So obviously we're not going to use the Intel one, so that can just be thrown away. AMD AM4 is one we want. If you also get the AMD STR4, that's Threadripper, so unless you're baller, then you don't want that. Okay, so we know we're using the AMD AM4. I pretty much have a good idea as to how it fits, but obviously this is a how-to video, so let's check the manual. So the manual will have instructions for all of them, AM4, TR4 and the Intel. Just obviously make sure that you're reading the right section. It'll, again, in Corsair and all of the other companies that do these AIOs, they all have a part at the top which says which one to do. For this, is basically what happens is you take out this stuff here. It's simply a bracket for the pump itself. Again, this will differ on the Intel versus AMD. The AMD one is a little bit different. I think the AMD one has a base plate. Well, actually, we can just discuss that first. So if you are using an Intel, sorry, you'll have a back plate for the motherboard itself, which is this here. If I can get it out. And then basically you've got two different options. One's LGA, what is it? Yeah, one's 1155 and one's 2066. I think the internal one's a 1155, but you can just refer to the manual for it. And what that does is, if you are using Intel, you put them all in the right place, and then you go around the back here, and then you put it through the motherboard, and you come through here, and then you screw it in with some of these here. You get two different options again for it, whether you're using 2066 or 1151. And in this case, it is, yeah, 2066, 1151. And then what you do is basically put this on the back, screw these from the front, and that keeps the back plate in position. And then get the pump itself and put the pump on, and use these 4 screws here. I mean, to be honest, I find that Intel's systems for the AIOs are probably a little bit easier than AMD's. AMD's use these little bracket things here, which can be a little bit finicky. To be honest, both are relatively easy, so I wouldn't be too concerned whether you're AMD or Intel. However, if you are using Intel, then that's what you use. When you buy an AMD board, it already comes with a backplate, and it also already comes with these brackets here. This is just a stock for the stock coolers and such. So you don't actually need to do anything here. You don't need to remove a backplate and replace it and anything like that, which is always nice. What you do need to do is basically unravel the plastic on the pump. Be careful when you unravel the plastic, because there's this plastic casing here which basically sits on top of the bottom of the pump. The reason it does that is to basically protect it, because it already comes pre-applied with thermal paste. This means you do not need to apply thermal paste to your CPU when you're adding an AIO basically. Double check, make sure there's thermal paste, but I've never bought a brand new AIO that hasn't had thermal paste. But please double check, because if you don't, then you might screw up your system. Right, so we're going to basically take off the plastic. We need to remove these metal brackets. So these metal brackets are what are used for the Intel build. So if you're doing an Intel build, you want to remove these. So for the Corsair ones, they basically just pull out. I think Thermaltake and NZXT are very similar. Yeah, oh no, Thermaltake have a screw solution, which basically you just have like two different teeth, one on the top, one on the bottom, and you like switch it and then it clicks in place. I can't remember what NZXT have, but they're all relatively similar. So we're going to take these out like that. There's a gap in the AIO pump, which you can basically insert these. You need to be a little bit tough with it. You'll hear a click. Or in that instance, you won't hear a click. Usually you hear a click. It becomes fairly obvious when they're in place or not. Yeah, that did not want to go in then, so I just had to move it around a little bit. Just double check. I mean, it should be fairly symmetrical all the way around. Just push them both in. Probably don't use the bracket, just use the actual solid metal part. And then that's it. That's your AMD AM4 brackets in place. What happens next is you use these. So you screw these two together, obviously within the circle itself, within the hole. And what that acts as, once you screw them together, imagine these on here, and then they clip into here on the actual motherboard. And then you keep screwing until they're tight, and that basically keeps the AIO in place. Right, we're going to attach the radiator to the top. This is always a really fun part. Reason being, you've got a bulky radiator with fans on, which is quite heavy. You've got a pretty bulky block on the bottom, which is just swinging around. And you're trying to fill it to the top or the side or the front or whatever. And at the same time, trying to not swing this wrecking ball into your PC. So just take your time, be careful. Okay, so before we fit the radiator itself, I'm just getting the screws ready. You use the washers for this. Most AIOs come with these little screws and washers. Okay, so we need to basically attach this radiator to the top here through the bottom, which is always fun. Okay, so we've unraveled the fan cables. Obviously they're all dangling here. When you're basically adding the AIO to the top of the case or to the side, wherever you're bloody adding it, just make sure you route these through to the back of the case. Otherwise you might not have the space to route them once the radiator is in place. So I'm going to put these through the middle here. This is probably one of the more difficult parts of just installing an AIO. Just routing all these cables through, and it would be ideal if you had 3 or 4 hands rather than just 2. So there's 6 cables, obviously 2 per fan, as I mentioned before. So right, all of our cables are through, they shouldn't fall back through. So what we're going to do now is, as we move it up, just keep feeding these cables through. And I'm just going to keep an eye on this here. Make sure it's not touching anything. Just don't want to mess up that thermal paste. Keep pulling the cables through here. Line it up properly, like that. Check all the holes are through. Make sure there's no issues on the front there. When you've put your radiator in place, just make sure all the screw holes line up with the case here. Obviously every single screw hole should be in one of these rivets to make sure that you can basically attach the radiator properly. You don't want to tighten the screws up too much before you've got all the screws in and before you've checked all the cables are in the right places, all the fan cables are pulled through properly, and just from the front there's nothing blocking anything. And obviously just take your AIO here, your pump, and just make sure that will fit properly once you've got everything in place, which for this it will. Next, what we need to do is obviously install the actual pump onto the CPU. As mentioned earlier, this will differ depending on whether you're using AM4, TR4 or Intel. For this, basically what you do is you screw these together through the holes here, making sure that the screw is at the top, so is on show, and the bracket here is at the bottom. On this, try and leave as much slack as possible. Just screw it ever so gently. Don't screw it too much, because you want as much, basically obviously the more you screw, the closer they get, which makes it extremely difficult to basically pull it over the bracket on here. You want as much as possible, so to the point where it's almost falling off, which is, well, there's falling off, so about there. For this, I'd also recommend putting the case on its side, just makes it a lot easier. So we're just going to do that quickly. Okay, case is on its side, makes it a lot easier when you're installing the pump itself. What we're going to do here is we're going to install it like this. It'll be nudged a little bit up against a graphics card. Another thing to keep in mind if you're using a graphics card is some of them these days are massive. So you just need to check, obviously, for space there. So what you do is, as you're coming down, you basically need to keep your hand on this. I always do the bottom one first. As it comes down, pull it through so it loops around. Then screw a little bit. Don't screw too much, because what that'll do is it'll make it too tight for you trying to clip in the other side. So you can screw that a little bit, switch hands, and then do the exact same on the other side, and then just double check that everything's in place and just make sure it's square. Because it's thermal paste and obviously you've just applied it to a metal object, it can move around a bit as it gets tighter, because obviously it's a liquid. So you just want to make sure it's straight and flush. I think that looks pretty good. Cables up here we'll deal with later. Now you just want to get a screwdriver. Please do not use an electric screwdriver or freaking drill or anything. Or you really don't need to apply that much pressure to this. I mean, I'm literally applying no pressure. All I'm doing is basically I'm going to screw it until it gets hard, until you're not able to screw anymore. Yeah, and there we go. And that's it. That's pretty much, I mean, that's your AIO. That's installed. It's done. Next up is obviously the cable management side of things and connecting the cables and such, which is a relatively easy job. The hardest part, or the most annoying part, is obviously trying to figure out where the heck to hide these wires off the pump itself. That can be a little bit painful sometimes. I can see with at least the Capellix this time, what they've done is they've made the PWM cable, so the cable for the CPU cooler, really thin cable. They used to do this, so it was a big cable and it just looked more messy. At least this one you could probably hide quite easy. This is new, that's for one. This is definitely changed. So this will, I imagine, fit into the commander core here. Looks like it does. You can see the white and white must fit there. This is obviously going to be attached to the side, to the back of the case, so you'll need to route this one through the top of the case here. So we'll do that, show you where you connect everything, and then wrap up. Okay, so we've stood the case back up. We've got the two cables on the front of here. As I mentioned, this PWM cable, where this goes is into the CPU cooler. Generally speaking, on a motherboard, the CPU cooler pin is at the top here. You will usually have two, one's a pump fan, one's a CPU cooler fan. Please revert to your motherboard manual if you're not sure which one's which. This goes into the CPU cooler fan. Basically, generally speaking, it's a 3, and generally speaking, that's a 4 pin. So what you do is just line up the plastic here, slot that in place. Obviously, if I was building this to just finish, I'd tuck this around somewhere, probably around the underneath of the actual CPU cooler, hide out the way, but as this is just a how-to, I'll allow each and every one of you to enjoy the cable management side of things. Right, next one is this, obviously. For this particular AIO, this fits to the commander core here. The commander core is going to be on the back, therefore we need to take this and route it round to the back. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to pull it up through here. Again, different cases, different methods. You enjoy figuring out which one you want to work with. What I will do though is not route it in between these pipes. I'm going to twist this around now. And here's the behemoth behind. So as mentioned before, we have our fan cables, RGB ones and the PWM fans. Here's the other two and here's the other two. So we have 6 of these. Obviously, if you've got a 360mm and you've got RGB fans, you're probably going to have 6. Some of them come with 3. I think the Fractal Design one links to one another. We'll probably do another video on some of the other AIOs, because now I'm thinking about it more, there's a few slight differences in how they're all installed. So we'll probably do a thermal take and an NZXT and a Fractal Design one in the future. But this is Corsair. Corsair uses these little RGB cables which fit onto the hub here, and obviously the typical PWM fan cables. Obviously, as well as that, we've also got this that we've just routed through from the AIO pump, which is obviously to command the command core. With the Corsair one, it comes with these little sticky pads here. What these are for is basically, what we'd probably do in this case is remove this, because this is basically for the case fans, and obviously because it's a Corsair case, we can just scrap this, remove it, put this in its place like that or something, stick it to the case itself, and then we can just use this to power the entire computer in terms of its fans and cooling. Again, you just need to, when you're building a PC, I always leave cable management to the end. I don't want to turn this into a PC building video, but I just want to basically just point out, we're doing a how to fit an AIO here. Obviously, if you're just adding an AIO to your PC, just upgrading it might be a lot easier. But if you are building a PC for the first time, you've got your new PSU, your GPU and all that stuff, leave the cable management to the end, because what you'll find is you'll crisscross cables and you'll need to untangle them, so you can route some cables here and there. So just keep that in mind. What happens now is we'll put all of the RGB cables, which go into this side. Yep, they're all numbered. So what you could do is probably have the 3 AIO ones, 1, 2, 3, and then the 3 front case ones, 4, 5, 6, if you wanted. On this there is 6. Yeah, 6. So you can fit 6. So once we've fit these 3 and these 3, we're all done. So you fit the RGB ones, you fit the motherboard. Sorry, not the motherboard. The PWM ones. Again, we're going to use the same. So this fan is now number 1, so it goes into number 1, number 1, and then we'll do number 2 and number 2, and then so on and so forth. Obviously, we're not going to leave this like this. Other than this, once you've connected the pump, you connected your fans to the core commander core iCUE thing. Last but not least, you've obviously got your power cable, which is a SATA, which will plug directly into your PSU via the SATA cable that your PSU will have. And then obviously this USB cable here, which basically what you do with this one is, most motherboards, they have USB ports on the bottom of the motherboard. So if you attached this to like here, you'd basically pull this through, bring it through one of the holes at the bottom, which we'll do right now. You'll find a few USB ports. Again, depends on the motherboard. Please revert to the motherboard manual. Generally speaking, you can have USB ports at the bottom. What you do now is simply check and line up, because you'll have one block missing, which you need to line up with the USB port, and then plug that in. And that's the only thing, except for obviously this little CPU fan here. This is the only thing that plugs into the motherboard. The SATA cable plugs directly into the PSU from this side, and that's it. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I appreciate we've not got round to the nice, fancy, finished computer, all sparkling and dancing and stuff. What we've done is really just shown you a really easy how to fit an actual AIO. What we're going to do behind the scenes now is we will be building a PC into one of these cases, one of these new Corsair 5000 cases. So there'll be another video on that, which you'll be able to see this Capellix AIO in action. And you'll be able to see it all its glory, how this case looks and everything running. If anyone has any questions or anything, please just comment on our video below. Please like the video, please subscribe to see more stuff like this. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.